Hello, and welcome to Michell Consulting's webinar series for our Michell University. Today we're going to be working with Infor FACTS and talk about the replenishment in the inventory control. For purposes of the demo today, we're going to be using FACTS 7.7 for our demo. And we're going to talk about replenishments and some definitions in the inventory control. So let's begin. Let's go into our inventory control. And we're going to be talking about our restocking. Before we go into the restocking, let's look at some setup information. So we're going to go into inventory control, file maintenance, infrequent file maintenance. And in our static controls, we can set some defaults. We see here on our general tab, we have our default safety allowance. We can set as a percentage. We have our default restocking method. We have two options. We can do a min-max or an order point line point. The order point line point restocking method is used to protect against unpredictable vendor lead times and erratic usage rates. This restocking method strictly adheres to the Gordon-Graham principles. When an item's on hand plus the on order reaches the order point, the replenishment cycle for the item begins. It is the lowest amount the user would risk of stock on hand plus on order when starting the replenishment cycle. We can also use the min-max. The min-max allows us to create a minimum order level and a maximum level for our stock. So in this principle, theoretically, when we hit our minimum, we're now going to trigger to order to the maximum. So we can set these defaults here in the infrequent file maintenance under static control file maintenance. These can be changed throughout the process. Another place we're going to look at is we're going to use, for today's demonstration, we're going to use an item, and we're going to see where some information comes. So also while we're in file maintenance, we're going to go to the warehouse item file maintenance. And for purposes of today's demo, we're going to use an item. Let's bring this up a little bigger so we can see. So for example, in warehouse 1, we're going to use item I-101. We can see some information about the item. Again, under the Restock tab, we can see for this item, again, we're using some defaults, but again, we can change this for items. We have here, we can do it based on our movement class. We can actually create a manual order quantity, and we're talking about this order quantity here that the system will automatically generate. So we can do it based on movement classes. Movement classes are set up on basically up to 14 classes that looks at a percentage of the inventory around 8%, the next 8%, and eventually some dead stock and unassigned stock. We can also do the manual, which we can set this whatever we want, and we can use the economic order quantity. The economic order quantity, which we're going to use for today's demonstration, this formula is used to determine the quantity of an item to order, which is best balances the cost of replenishment and the cost of carrying the inventory to create the lowest possible outgoing cost with the greatest number of inventory turns. So we use a formula which is basically we're taking 24 times the cost of replenishment, also known as the R cost, times the usage rate, dividing by the cost of carrying the inventory, which is the K cost times the unit cost. And again, this formula is used to calculate an order quantity. So here we see the information here on the order quantities. We can also look at usage. And again, we can see that we're looking for warehouse 1, this usage. Our current period is June of 2010. This is what we're using for today's demo. So we can see here the current period. We have an actual of 4. Then we're looking at the previous periods, so on, and the last period. We have our qualified amount and our actual amount. These two will be equal. You can lock this amount. You can also use this to filter. There may be some unusual fluctuation. Maybe in this case you're selling about 30 a month. For some odd reason you took an order for 1,000 an unusual order, it's not going to happen. You're going to maintain 30 a month. You may want to go in here and modify this, the actual you're going to use. You may have 1,000 here, and you may want to bring that down to 30. So you have the ability of going through this usage, and again, you can actually go in and set this. We can see here that if we look at this particular restocking, we can do it by warehouse. So for warehouse 1, you can see that we have an order point of 10 and a line point of 24. What this is telling us is when we fall below 10, the system is going to recommend us to order the quantity we need to get back to 24. If we go into our second warehouse and we use that same item, you can see here we can set different. Now this one we have an order point of 1 and a line point of 5. If we look at our usage, we can see it's a less. So warehouse 2 we're averaging about 10 a month, where in warehouse 1 we were averaging about 30. So again, same principle applies for each warehouse. So again, for purpose of today's demo, we're going to be staying with warehouse 1, and we're going to be using this item here. So again, we can look at the main information on this item, and you can see right now that we have on hand of 0. We have a committed of 7, and we have 10 on back order as well as 10 on order. So our quantity, our available quantity is a -7, and we'll see how that comes into play. Let's go back out. Let's go into our restocking. And there's some reports we can do. We can do the demand action report. Again, this report allows us to just look at the quantities, the demand, what we may need to order, and so on. I'm just going to set this to the notepad. And again, we can do vendors. We're going to use our vendor V105. So we can run all vendors. Again, we can do our classes. We can search. We saw standard in facts. We can use our description. We can use, again, our warehouse. We can include the on order. We can skip lines between and look at inactive. You can also look at items that are flagged. Flagged items, like we said, are the items that you've made a manual change to the usage. And you can do that, no, or you can do an option by item as you go through. So let's take a look at this. And again, you'll see for flagged items, actual usage. We'll be using calculations in case we have changed anything. And again, we can see our demand. So we have this, our 1 unit here. Again, we can see our movement class. We can see our order point is 10. Our line point is 24. We're not using min-max. We can also see that the order quantity, again, is 14. We can see a lead time of 4. Our available is -7. And then our on order, our back order, and our usage. So again, we can look at this, and we can see the information related to this item. We can look at the vendor review dates report because, again, we can set review dates with our vendors. Only when we run this, we tend to do it in a distribution environment by vendor. Maybe we order from one vendor on a Monday, we order on another vendor on a Tuesday, and so on. So we can do that. I'm just going to go ahead and set the printers so we can put it on the screen. So again, we can do a beginning date. Again, right now, our date for the demo is January 1st, 2012. We do our review. Again, our warehouses, we want to do all warehouses. We can select our buyers. Again, we can set up our buyers if we want to do it by that. Our current needs here, calculate the current, display the current needs, so we can see it on the report, as well as the frozen controls, and active vendors only. So again, here we see our vendor review, and we're looking at our particular vendors. And again, we see And this is in the infrequent file maintenance for the vendors for our review cycles, and we can see the reviews. We can see the cycles, the last date of a purchase order, and so on. So we have some information here, again, that's helpful when planning our replenishment. We can look at this report. We can see requirements and so on. So let's look at now at the actual replenishment report. So here we go into the replenishment report. And again, we can pick our vendors. We're just going to use vendor V105. We can select specific movement classes. We're going to do all. We're going to use warehouse 1. We can look at a restocking warehouse. We have options that are setups. We can do a direct from vendor, which is just a setup in the infrequent file maintenance, or we can actually do transfers. This is going to determine if we're going to create suggested POs versus suggested transfers. Because we may want to, we may have a consolidation that what we want to do is we want a replenishment, one of the satellite warehouses, and we may have a lot of merchandise in our main warehouse. So we don't want to order more merchandise from the vendor. We want to generate a suggested transfer. And we do have a webinar series in detail on how the transfers work with suggested transfers. We also have one with purchase orders and how the purchasing and suggested purchase orders work. So again, this is the normal setup, and this item is set up, and this default is set up direct from vendor. We can also determine what we want to include. We want to look at usage, stockouts, current quantity, any warehouse surplus, and the weight per item. So again, we're just going to use all these information. We can go, let's just, I canceled that by mistake. And here we can go, again, all our buyers and our flagged items. We have that same option. So we're going to run this, and again, for flagged items, we're using the actual usage. That's the usage that we would manually override. So in the example we gave, if we had 1,000, we want to change the actual usage to 30 because that's kind of what our usage should be. We just had an unusual large sale, which we don't want to consider that for ordering purposes. We can do this here. So again, let's see what we've got. We're using this one item. You can see that we have an order point of 10, and we have a line point of 24. So we meet the criteria. We see that we have available 7. Again, our availability is our quantity on hand, which we had 0, minus our committed, which was 7, so we have a negative 7. Our max, or our line point, is 24. So because we're below our order point, which is 10, we need to get to 24. So obviously we're going to order 31. We need to order 7 to get our inventory back to 0, because we're at negative 7, plus an additional 24. So again, we have all the information here that we can make a decision with, and we can look at this. If we decide this is okay, again, we've checked your report. Do you wish to create the suggested POs? We're getting this message here because we're doing direct from vendor. So we're going to say yes. We're going to click OK. Now we actually have a suggested PO. If we run this report again, we can see that now existing suggested PO. So it suggested that we get the 31, and you can see where that's coming from here. You notice the asterisk. Items below the minimum order point need to order now, and again, it tells you the information. So now we have this suggested PO that's already existing. We can see that from the purchasing system. We're just going to say no to create that again. So we didn't update that. So if we go into purchase order, we have in the purchase order entry, we have the suggested PO entry as well as suggested PO report. So let's take a look at the report. And again, we have the option to look at restocking and special orders. This was a restock, so if we run this, we can see here our item down here, vendor 105, and our item, you can see the information we have here. So again, if we run that by vendor, just to look at our one vendor, we see our suggested purchase order and our report. We can also see that here in our suggested PO entry. And if we look at that warehouse, and we look at, again, the restocking method, we can see it here. Again, we can check this on our detailed webinar about suggested PO, but if we go here and we do a special order, we won't see it. Special orders are suggested POs coming directly from a sales order versus a restocking. And we're just going to go delete this so we can run the process again. So we can say, let's go back to our inventory control. Let's take a look at that again. So I removed the suggested PO. So we're going to go into our replenishment report. Again, we're going to select our one vendor. Again, we'll select the flag. And you can see here what we have. We have our available at -7. This is because our quantity on hand was 0, and our committed was 7. So our available is quantity on hand minus committed. You can see there's no existing suggested POs. And you can see our suggested order amount. This is because our minimum or order point is 10, and our max or our line point is 24. So when we go below the minimum or the order point, we need to order to get back to the max. In this case, we need to order 31, which would be 7 to get us to 0, and then 24 to get us to the amounts we need. So again, we have all the information on the report here. And if we select our update here, we want to create a suggested PO. If we go back now and look at the report, we will see that we have the suggested PO here. We have that. If we go into our purchase module, we can see our suggested PO report. Again, if we look at our vendor, we can see that we have the purchase order. So if we want to actually create the purchase order, we can go here, PO entry. We would put our vendor in, again, our warehouse information. And we have the option. If we select import suggested POs, again, you're going to have the ability of going through the lines. You can see here we can make a change if we want. We're going to click OK. And there we have on our purchase order. So in this case, we can continue the purchase order, and we can receive our merchandise. We'll go ahead and delete this, PO. So let's recap what we've learned today. We can see that in our inventory control, we have an option for restocking. This information is pulling from our file maintenance. So if we look at our infrequent file maintenance, and if we look at our static controls, we can set defaults. Here, when we run our restocking, we can see that we have our default safety allowance at 50%. Our default restocking method is order point, line point. We can also choose that min and max. Again, difference being is the min max will have a minimum value. When you go below the minimum value, it will order to the max. The order point, line point follows the Gordon Graham, which you have the order point. You fall below the order point, you go up to the line point. And again, you default order quantity method. This is how you calculate the order quantity. You can do it based on a movement class, the economic order quantity, which again is based on the Gordon Graham, and you can do a manual order quantity. So this information feeds into the defaults. We can see that if we go into file maintenance in the item warehouse file maintenance. So if we call up our item, you can see here on the restocking tab, again, this information is my default. When I create items, I could go ahead and override this. You can see our order point of 10, our line point of 24. And again, you can see our usage. You can see our actual usage. You can see the qualified, which is being generated by the system, and our actual. Again, this is used for if there's an unusual amount. In this case, we're looking at around 30 per month, but let's say we had a large sale of 1,000. So here our qualified was 1,000. We want to change this. We can just override. For example, we can change this to 31 and so on. And we can use that. We can also lock, use actual only, and we can reset the maining to average. We also see our usage for all our months here, and so on. That information comes to play when we actually go in and order. So if we look here at our restocking, we have some reports. We have our demand action report. Again, we can run this for all or by vendors. So we're going to look at this, and again, we're looking at our flagged items. So here it lets us, for the flag, actual calculations will be used. So this allows us to go in and take a look so you can see here what we've got. We've got an order point of 10, a line point of 24. We have our min max, which we're not using here, so there's 0. So again, our order quantity is 14. The system's calculating order quantity based on usage. We have a lead time of 4. And we can see that our available is -7. We have an on-order quantity and a back order quantity of 10. So we have the information here, and we have our average usage of 33. So this one would look good. We go in. We can look at our vendor review dates. We can set when to run replenishment for vendors. A lot of clients, what we do is depending on the vendor and the movement. Some vendors, they may review and order on a weekly basis. Some maybe on a monthly basis, every 3 months and so on. You can set that up. The main report is the replenishment report. This will actually do the calculations, and it will create either a suggested transfer or a suggested purchase order, depending on your replenishment path. Again, that's controlled in the infrequent file maintenance, but you can override it during the report. So we'll look at our vendor again, V105. And you can see here, doing a direct from vendor to create the PO. We can also do it here from a warehouse if we wanted to. What do we want to include? Again, our buyer and our flagged items. You can see here that There's an existing suggested PO, but it would have created a PO for us. Okay, the suggested amount. What we're looking at is we're below our minimum, or our order point of 10. We're below by -7. So in order to get to our max or our line point, we need to order 31 to bring us to 24. And when we run this program and we update, we'll actually create the suggested PO. If we go into our purchase module, we can see here in our purchase entry, we can look at our suggested PO report. And we run this, and we can see that we have a suggested PO with a 31. You can also see it here from the suggested PO entry. If we can add additional or make any changes to this. Again, our methods are restocking versus special orders. Restocking is coming from the replenishment. Special orders would be coming from sales orders. And again, so we can see our item and our 31 units. When we actually go to create the purchase order in PO entry, we have the option of importing these suggested POs. Put our vendor in. And if we say yes to import suggested POs, we have the option of skipping a line or importing all. We can import all and all remaining. We can import this one at a time. We can skip and do the remaining, or we can skip the suggested PO. We don't need to bring them all in. But again, you can see it here. Let's just delete this document. Let's go back to our menu. So again, that concludes our session today on Infor FACTS' replenishment. We can see that we went to inventory control and we did our replenishment report, which is under our restocking module. Once again, we thank you for your time. We're recording this webinar. This will be available on our website. You can visit us at www.michellgroup.com to view. This concludes our webinar. Thank you.